Thanks for joining me. I'm pretty excited about this. I've been uh, um, excited to pray through it and to see what God does with all of it. So I appreciate you being here with me. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in. And I know that I'm recording this so that I can send it out to people who are not able to be with us today. But I wanted to introduce myself because a lot of you on here currently know who I am, but some others may not. And so I'm Hannah Morell. I am the, as my papa used to say, chief cook and bottle washer of Broken and Hopeful. That means that I do all the things, except for my wonderful board members who do come alongside and help me with some things. But I am about almost 20 years into pastoral counseling, and I started Broken and Hopeful almost 7 years ago now. And it's pastoral counseling I like to define because some people wonder what that means. Some people assume I counsel pastors. That's kind of what they think, which is not true. Although I do sometimes actually, but it's not just pastors. Pastoral counseling to me is a way of being able to deal with the whole person, body, soul, spirit. So I get to do share all of my heart with people and talk about how Jesus meets us in the middle of whatever it is that we're dealing with. And we're trying to bring healing to past so that we can move into the present and the future with a little hope. So I do it's donation-based counseling. I know that's a terrible business plan. I've been told multiple times, but it's what God's called me to do. And I am thrilled to be able to do it because I get to work with a vast community of people who would not be able to afford typical counseling. And that's so fun. It runs the gamut of people who are, domestic violence victims, single moms, teens. I've got, people coming out of cults sometimes. The sky's the limit. We've got all sorts. And it's wonderful because I am able to work with people, and some people after we've been counseling for a while actually come alongside and support indefinitely, which is pretty fun. I still have people. There's one amazing gentleman that I worked with his daughter 20 years ago, I think now, and he still supports monthly. And that is so cool to me because that doesn't happen very often. So also ministry provides blog posts. We do a women's retreat in Golden, Colorado. That'll be coming up in November if anyone's interested. I've got a podcast that has a few episodes and I'm working on some more. One book's done. It's called Identity, Truth, Versus. You guys are acquainted with it. And I'm actually offering, if anyone would like to become a recurring donor of $20 or more a month, I want to send you a copy of it. It is a booklet. I'm not going to oversell it. Okay. It's not a huge book, but I love it because it's easy to hand out, it's easy to read through, and it's easy to read topically. So it's kind of a good introduction. So what else? That book is done. One is in the editing process. My lovely mother, who is on this Zoom today, is working on editing that, which I'm really excited about. That one's about the transformation of abiding. And I walk through subjects everywhere from salvation to relationships and in between, and from a real relational perspective, because man, we need relationship and not religion. And so I'm really excited about that when it gets done. Okay, so I'm going to pray and I'm going to get started talking about anxiety. Father, thanks that you are you're the empowerment for anything that we do well. And I pray that these lovely people who are listening to my words wouldn't hear mine, but would hear yours. That anything I say that is stupid or wrong, that you would negate that and keep the stuff that's good and speak to their hearts and free them just a little bit more from the fear and anxiety that so dominates our culture and our world today. Thanks in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're talking about anxiety and Jesus today. Anxiety is kind of a buzzword these days. A lot of people talk about it, and it kind of runs the gamut. Anytime somebody says that they have anxiety, I ask what that means to them, because some people it's debilitating panic attacks that feel like a heart attack, and they end up in the hospital. For some people, it's just some awkwardness in social settings, and anywhere in between, right? We're all over the place in there. And so it's always helpful to know kind of where they are with the struggle. But I actually had a man tell me that Christians don't struggle with anxiety and depression, which I had some words with him because I did not feel that was true. But, looking through the Bible, I see so many people that are struggling with anxiety or depression. And that's part of why I think God talks about fear so much. They say there's 365 mentions of do not be afraid, fear not, those kind of things. God knew that we were afraid, right? Or he wouldn't have to talk about it quite so much. And so there are so many walls that we build up between us and Christ. And yes, Christ's life is the answer in all of this. But it's so important to know how to get from here to his life. And that's why I want to incorporate this in it's anxiety and Jesus as we talk about it. So anxiety can present in different ways. We talked about that, and with different causes. I do believe God wants us to walk in freedom, but that's a lot easier said than done sometimes. One of the ways that we end up with some struggles with anxiety is it often comes from an expectation or a standard we think we are supposed to be achieving, but we don't feel like we have the power to do so. Flipping through social media a few days ago, which, yeah, I know, that's not the place to find any sort of encouragement, but I found 10 things that I was doing wrong with my kids, 5 ways to make my body look like I'm not really 43, 3 things to do right now with my house to make it look like a designer lives there. It does not look like that. What your husband or wife really wants and how you can be that desirable. And maybe the worst, what God wants you to do to be the best Christian you can. This is the communication of the world. And honestly, some of the church, which stinks, is do more, be more. This is your expectation. Keep jumping. Maybe you'll get there. And everyone's willing to tell you what you're doing wrong and why you should be afraid of it. We don't need any help with that. At least I don't. I find plenty of things I think I do wrong and plenty of standards I miss. And so looking for the right expectation or standard, I think, is really important, because we want to sift through all this garbage that comes at us all the time. I don't know about you, but when I get fixated on some of this stuff, I go down the tubes really quickly, because I am not doing any of these things and I'm not doing them well. But the difference is our standards end up being higher than God's, because God's standard for us is, apart from me, you can do nothing. John 15:5. And I like to say that you nailed that standard before you got out of bed this morning. So congratulations. And yet what we do is we try to keep jumping, keep doing, keep producing. Maybe if I do this, then he'll love me. But he said he loved us while we were his enemies. So that doesn't quite compute. Our standards become higher than God's, and that's an incredible amount of pressure and completely impossible for us to achieve. And so first thing in dealing with anxiety is question to see if this is an expectation that you have welcomed from someone else, or you've put on yourself, or if it's actually the one that God is looking at when he looks at you. Because he says the only way to live the Christian life is through him. He's the only way that makes it possible, right? And yet we keep trying to do it on our own and to fix it and to do more and to produce. Believe me, I've been there and I continue to be there sometimes. But I know that when I get really worked up, it's often because I have set out a standard that I am trying to achieve? This could be a standard that we learned from birth. This could be a standard that we learned from work, could be a standard from our spouse, our kids, our friends, even just ourselves. But I would really question if it's been told to you that it was God's. I would really question that, because I don't think that's accurate. So the only way to live the Christian life is through God's power and Jesus' life within. He says that your old life and expectations have died on the cross with him, Galatians 2:20, and now you get to walk in new life as a new creation. So we don't run from weakness anymore. We don't try to hide it or pretend it's not there. We embrace it and we ask Christ to be our strength in each moment. What else do we need? Love, courage, sometimes the oomph to get out of bed, all of that. Your worth is not tied up in how many people's expectations you can achieve. Believe me, I used to think it was. My last year in college, I was working almost full time. I was taking a ridiculous load of classes. This was undergrad. I was working at a church that was a cool church, but I ended up doing 6 nights a week. I was doing something, small group. I cooked dinner for the entire church on Sunday evenings, which, it was only 50 people, but it was still 50 people that I was cooking for every Sunday evening. And I was trying to prove that I mattered. And I didn't realize at the time. I thought that, this was a standard I could keep up. 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night is not a standard I can keep up. I discovered very quickly. But what I proved was that I was burned out and a little bit crazy. I didn't prove that I was something more than, whatever I assumed people thought I was. So don't try to fight inadequacy or feelings of inadequacy, really, with proofs that you've done it right. Instead, run away into the truth of what God says about you. He isn't afraid of your weakness, but promises to be strength in weakness and to be everything you need for daily life, including each practical detail. And that's so huge to me, because I've always fought inadequacy. Oh no, see, I'll show you how great I am. I'll do more. I'll produce more. I'll be busier. Have you ever noticed that when you ask somebody how they're doing, the answer is often busy? And that's not really how they're doing, is it? But that's the answer we feel like we're supposed to put out there, because that means we're worth more. We've got stuff to do. Instead of just saying how we actually are doing. So don't bow to the expectations or standards of yourself or the world around you, but embrace weakness and expect it to be the catalyst to allowing Christ to be expressed through you. If you feel anxious, admit it and bring it to Jesus for him to work through. So often we run away from it and pretend that it's not there and try to hide it, and it's ineffective. 2 Corinthians 12:9 and 10. But he answered me, my grace is always more than enough for you, and my power finds its full expression through your weakness. So I'll celebrate my weaknesses, for when I'm weak, I sense more deeply the mighty power of Christ living in me. So often when we struggle with anxiety or any sort of struggle that seems to make us weak, it seems like we're sort of a second-class citizen. And that's not true at all. Jesus actually says, okay, let's do this. You're weak, give it to me. And I'll enjoy that. But come to me. And it's so relational. Okay, another cause of anxiety can be a constant state of stress or survival that never seems to end. One of the personality tests that I use was written by Mike Wells, and it's a pretty simple thinker, feeler, doer sort of situation. I love it because it's such a basic tool that is really effective. But it measures 3 different areas. So there's the social environment, which is your typical everyday. There's under stress, and then there's inaffection with those closest to you. The under stress, I can't tell you how many people I talk to that have lived as if their personality was in the under stress for years. And they don't function as their social environment personality anymore because they haven't been able to. They haven't been able to let themselves down enough to really function in the way God made them to be. So what happens with stress and survival? One thing that I have noticed is this idea that we're trying to control. And that doesn't always look like I think we think of control as sort of being a manipulative thing, but often I find it's just this grasping of just everything stop, if I hold it like this, then maybe it won't hurt anymore. It's not necessarily something where we're trying to manipulate anyone. We just want it to stop. Control, however, is an illusion. We don't have it as much as we think we do. And anxiety is one of those things that often occurs when we suddenly realize we have no control, right? If you are flying in a jumbo jet and the pilot passes out and it's up to you to fly the jumbo jet, you're going to have a little anxiety, unless you are a pilot, and then that illustration doesn't apply to you. But for me, that would be shocking. And I would go into hyperdrive because I'm supposed to do something that I have no control, I have no education, and I don't have any power to achieve it. That is one of those places that often when we realize we don't have as much control as we think we do, then we either go into anxiety and try to grab some more, which doesn't really work, or we freak out completely. And I think there's another place we can go where if we admit how little control we have and rest in trusting a God who loves you, which I know is sometimes hard to buy. And that's one of the things that I love to work with people on, is their emotional concept of God. Because if God is this Zeus ogre in the sky shooting you with lightning bolts, well, you're not going to trust him, that's for sure. But I don't believe he's like that. I believe he loves you and he knows how to put you in the best place every day to know him. And he can work through any of this stuff, which I know is a hard buy sometimes, but I do believe that's true. I think one of the things that a lot of people say with control is to let it go. And I struggle with that concept, because to me, if I let it go, that means I don't care about it. It's just kind of a sloughing off, because it's not important. And so for me, it's more of an entrusting. I have to take my precious people or things or future or heart or whatever it is and put it in the lap of Jesus and say, here you go. I don't know what to do with this. And I'm trusting you to take care of it, because it's not a simple letting go. It has to be put somewhere safe. And so, with my kids going to school, I hear horrible, awful stories every day. And so I did not get super excited about sending my kids off to school where so many horrible, awful things happened, right? I wanted to bubble wrap them and put them in the basement somewhere, which sounds sketchy, but that's not what I mean, just to keep them safe, right? And I can't do that, because that is not where God's meeting them. But I can entrust them, and do entrust them every day as I send them off to school, saying, okay, God, you've got this. Whatever you're allowing in their lives, you are going to work through it, and you're going to love them through it. And that to me is a relief. Then I can breathe a little easier. Another way that we can be in this constant state of stress or survival is trying to take responsibility for emotions of others around us. I think this particularly pertains to those of us who tend to have a lot of feeler, who are very relational, and who are kind of reading everyone in the room and absorbing all the emotions of those people. And that becomes exhausting, and it doesn't actually help. And I know that some of you are going to argue with me on that one, but I don't believe that we can actually make anyone feel anything. Mike Wells told me that a long time ago, and I didn't like it when he said it. He says, we don't make anyone feel anything, they choose to. And I said, I don't think that's right. And I argued with him, but he's right. And, many years later, I finally sorted through that. But we can't take on emotions from other people. We end up trying to play God. And no offense, but all of us make a terrible God. And so as we're taking on emotions and saying, well, this person's mad, therefore I have to go make them happy. But then what if they don't get happy? And what if I exhaust and spend myself trying to make them happy and it never happens? And if I do make them happy, then I end up jumping on a roller coaster of somebody else's emotions immediately following that, because now I got to go make this person happy. And we can't just run from one emotional roller coaster to the next, trying to keep everyone okay. It also doesn't allow them to pursue what God's doing in their life, because we are bubble wrapping them essentially, right? We're trying to keep them from all the problems that could happen. So when you realize you are trying to take responsibility for emotions, one of the things I practice with my feelers is we talk about, okay, did you choose this feeling for them? And of course, the answer is no. But we have to walk through that in order to get to a place where they understand, oh, I really didn't make this happen in them. Because I know I struggle with it still, oh, I made him mad. No, I didn't. He chose to be mad. And so looking at some of those things and understanding what things we need to take off of us, I think really helps that stress and survival to simmer down a little bit. Another way we can be in this stressful survival mode is trying to maintain an image so people don't see through us. Image maintenance and comparison leads to judgment and not love. This can be physically, relationally, financially, spiritually. We're really good at this. We compare and we manufacture an image that looks like we think people want it to look like, because in theory it's supposed to keep us safe, I think, honestly. Then we can stay behind here and everyone sees the image and they're fine with the image and we'll be back here. One of the greatest reliefs of my life was when God finally shattered my image. It was not pleasant in the middle of it, but man, not having to carry that thing around anymore and prop it up all the time, it was really, really exciting. I am not a super mom who has it all together and can scale tall buildings. I no longer have to worry about being found out. If anybody wants to know about the things like my history, the things that I do wrong, I am more than happy to share it with people, because I don't have to hide behind this pretense that I am something spiritual anymore. So I put the image up because I felt like a fragile woman who is affected by what others think of me way too often. A judgmental mess who tries to put others down in my head in order to feel better about myself. A woman who feels left out of friendships and betrayed and rejected by others. A mother who often gets it wrong and has to apologize to my kids. A wife who tries to love her husband well, but doesn't even know where to start sometimes. But you know what? That's not really who I am. That's how I feel sometimes. Who I am, though, I am loved. I am seen. I'm delighted in, enjoyed, sung over. That's what Jesus says about me. My image wasn't nearly as good as the real thing, because that's the real thing. And when I can settle in myself slowly, it's a process, right? That is true, and retrain my brain to accept that instead of soaking in the junk, it allows me to actually love, because I can't love when I'm comparing, right? I can't love when I'm trying to maintain my image, because I have to hide behind there all the time. We can't control circumstances, but we can see Jesus in them and ask for his power and love to get through them. Benita Risner, who wrote an incredible, I guess she's written a couple of books now on suffering. She says, we want deliverance from the problem, and sometimes instead he provides sustenance. We want to get out of there. But he says he walks through the valley of the shadow of death with us, right? And so often we're running away from weakness. We're trying to maintain an image. We're trying to take responsibility for people and just manufacture the whole thing. Doesn't it sound exhausting? It is, I know. And so we're putting all that down, which will feel wrong because we feel like we're supposed to at some point. But in putting it down, we go, oh, okay, now what do I do? It's kind of a scary concept, isn't it? Freedom is kind of a scary concept sometimes. But it's really exciting to be able to move forward into truth and relationship, because God is always, always relational. Finally, although not exhaustively, I realize anxiety can be a result of trauma and pain from the past, feeling that we're going to have to go through it again, or just be ready to deal with it. And so it's this constant feeling of, here it comes again, and you're waiting for the shoe to drop, kind of. I would say, number one, don't hide your pain from God. I think a lot of times we try to, in managing emotions, we try to manage God's too. We don't want him unhappy with us, Well, I complained a couple days ago, so I really should stop that, Well, Hezekiah, David, Gideon, we've got a lot of really good examples of people who just kept coming back and going, well, now what do I do? Now this guy's trying to kill me. Now this other army's going to come destroy us. Now there's this going on, and these are life and death situations, right? This isn't just I'm a little upset today. He can handle I'm a little upset today too, right? But don't hide your pain. Lay it out in front of him and ask him for help. Ask for healing, but understand that healing doesn't always look the way we want it to. Some people continue to deal with the repercussions of the past, but you're not controlled by it. And I feel like that's a tricky one sometimes. But here's how I would say it. Dr. Edith Eger, she survived a concentration camp as a Hungarian Jew. She was a teenager when she went in. And she said that in her 80s, she could be in a Costco and somebody would come over the loudspeaker and she would drop to her knees, just like she had done when she was 16 in the concentration camp. And I think there's this idea that that's wrong, that she should be over it by now, that kind of thing. But I feel like if you change how you think about that and how you define it, and I loved how she put it, because she just said, well, I just got up and I kept shopping, well, there she goes again. Okay. But I think when we take on this idea that, oh, look how broken I am, look how messed up I am. No, that's a normal reaction for what you went through. That's okay. And so we're kind of giving ourselves the same grace that Jesus gives us, right? And he says, I still bear nail scars. Did you know that? Even into eternity. Because I want you to know that the pain of the past can draw us close to him. And we're not controlled by it. And healing in that looks different in different situations and in different people. And so accepting that and saying yes to that, whatever that looks like, that's where we get relational instead of formulaic. Because formula says, well, you've had this pain and trauma in your past, so therefore you should be here. Oh, you're not here? Well, you're failing. Instead of, oh, I don't know what to do with that. But Jesus does, so I'm going to bring it to him and see how he's going to heal me. And sometimes we end up with some of the scars still, right? Some of the things that make us drop to the ground in Costco. And it's what we do with that in our brains that's so important. Saying it's okay, draw near to him. And every time that something like this happens, as we come near to him, he loves that, doesn't he? He loves that closeness. I remember when my kids were tiny, they're 9 and 12 now, so they don't do this as often. But when they were tiny and they'd have a nightmare and they'd come busting into my room, teary-eyed, or I'd hear them wailing from another room or whenever. And I would go in there, and I actually really loved it, because it was this sweetness of, you're scared. I want to be with you. I'm not going to push you away. This is a scary thing. Sure. And so I would lay down in their bed with them, and I'd comfort them, and I'd pat their back and just sit there and pray with them. And it was fine. And I think so often we have this expectation that God wants to go, really? Again? Another nightmare? You know, when he's saying, it's okay. I'll come every time. I'll always come and sit next to you, and it's okay. And so it changes what we do, I think, with that anxiety. Instead of allowing it to be our definition, and instead of allowing it to stomp on us and tell us that we're broken or awful or not measuring up, we get to come to him and say, you're the only way that there's going to be strength in this weakness, whatever the weakness is, right? And so we get to embrace that. All right, so some practical tools, because I am all about rubber meets the road Christianity. I really want daily life Jesus. And I always want to look at the tools he's given us for bringing it from here to here, and not just say, well, go, do this. This should be fine. So some of the tools that I use with people who are dealing with anxiety, and myself as well. One is to do a brain dump. And that means basically that you sit down with a piece of paper. People who are not paper and pencil people, I guess you can use a laptop, but I don't find it as effective. And I will just write everything that's going on in my brain. It doesn't have an order. It doesn't have a system. It's not, nice sometimes. I just go for it. Just write it all down, write it all down, write it all down. It could be pages. And then I go back through and identify the things that are practically something I can do something about. And so this thing, usually there's 2 or 3 in several pages, right? It's not a lot, but those are things that I can transfer and put on a list. Okay, at some point I'm going to do these things. That would be good. The rest of it, number one, the rest of it, we're looking at identifying the fears and standards that might come up there. Like, my house isn't spotless and I haven't done what I thought I should do this week. Sometimes the answer to that is just, well, that's okay. There's always next week, and registering that this is a standard that we're trying to hold ourselves to that is just not realistic and not helpful, right? Because we just beat ourselves with these standards. The other thing, though, is everything else that you can't do something about currently and you have no control over. This is another place that you take this and you give it to Jesus and you say, okay, and I need you to take this for me because it's too big for me. I don't know what to do with all this. But something about putting it all down on paper and looking at it, it really allows us to stop juggling things in our brains, because that in itself is so stressful, and to put it on paper and to see it for what it is. And I think sometimes that can be really helpful in knowing what we're even asking God to help in. Another tool is don't be afraid of rest. And I say that with wincing because there's a difference to me between going to the spa or drinking wine or so many of these things that we put out there like they are rest. That's not what I mean. Rest, that's distraction, right? And numbing. That's what that is. Productivity does not equal worth. And so this is the acknowledgement of that, saying, I'm going to stop all of this and maybe just sit in silence for a couple minutes. Do you know how terrifying that is to someone who measures their worth by productivity? It's terrifying because you're losing a moment. Oh, what are we going to do? But it's often in those moments that we can finally breathe and hear God, which is what we wanted the whole time. And so for some people, rest, it looks different for everyone. For some people, it's taking a walk and looking around at the trees. For some people, it's sitting quietly in your car. For some people, it's turning on some music that's uplifting and positive and, pointing us in the right direction and just soaking in it for a while. All of that can be restful, but you have to figure out what feels restful to you. And what we're looking for really is spiritual rest, right? It's not just sleeping, although sleeping can be good sometimes. But it's also embracing that quiet and that silence, even just for a few minutes, to allow God to remind us that He's bestowed worth on us. We don't need to generate it. Another tool that I use a lot is leading emotions with truth. Emotions aren't bad. We beat up on emotion a lot, but they're really good warning lights, and they should always be followers, not leaders, because when our emotions lead us, we end up like a runaway train in a big ditch. So I like to use emotions, and I'll talk to a lot of counselees about this. When you define what emotion surrounds some of this really negative, yucky thinking, then we can start to say, oh, I'm thinking about something that's really bad for me right now. And it's interesting because we will check in with like dietary things, we'll go, oh, well, this isn't good for me, I shouldn't eat this. But we won't think about what thoughts are not good for us often. We just kind of let them buzz through, and we forget that sometimes they're liars, and sometimes they're based in past junk, and sometimes they're really, really detrimental if they're not led with truth. And so we're using the emotion to have us rewind and understand what we're believing. And then we're also using anchors for reminders, because I can't tell you how often myself and others say, well, I just forget. I just get going and I'm anxious and I'm trying to fix it all and I'm trying to control and I'm trying to, and I just forget. And so we're using some of these anchors are practical, tangible things that remind us of something that's intangible. And so, in the Old Testament, I love how God is always telling them to stack rocks, right? Go build an altar here. Oh, you cross the river, build an altar. And those altars are symbolic because every time they walk by that thing, they want, oh yeah, remember what God did right there? That was cool. We can probably trust Him again, and we need those. And so this idea that we're just supposed to remember is kind of far-fetched to me, because God knows how we work. We forget a lot. And so whatever those anchors are, I have some people put sticky notes of truth in their bathroom because they know when they hit that mirror, they need a sticky note, right? I have other people who wear jewelry that's symbolic. I have other people who, when they pass a certain place on the highway on the way to work, that's their cue to check in and go, how are we doing today, God? I forgot about you, but cool thing, you came with me anyway. And so these places where we're checking in and coming to Him and hearing from Him, those are all so important, to just those little reminders, and not to turn around and beat up on ourselves because we forgot again. Very normal. So Philippians 4, 6, and 7, don't be pulled in different directions or worried about a thing. Be saturated in prayer throughout each day, offering your faithful requests before God with overflowing gratitude. Tell Him every detail of your life. Then God's wonderful peace that transcends human understanding will guard your heart and mind through Jesus Christ. I used to read that verse and it sounded like something that was impossible. I'm supposed to pray all the time. Are you joking? And yet, what I missed was this is so relational. God saying, I want to be with you all the time. I love it when you talk to me. And you know what? It's good for you too. So come talk to me. It's not a, I'm going to pound you if you don't, but it's, I really enjoy you and I want to be with you. So come here. Let's talk. We're moving our brain from fear. So another something that I'll talk about with when you are fixated or obsessive with some of this stuff is we can't just not think about something. A lot of people say, well, just stop thinking about it. And I want to say, well, if that was possible, this wouldn't be a conversation, because often we can't. And so, what we're doing instead is moving our brain, redirecting. And so a couple of things that I recommend for that. And of course, trial and error is best for that. You guys figure that out. But gratitude, and I don't just mean, thanks for the food, or whatever. For me, I have to have something memorized because I can't be creative when I'm in that negative spiral. And so I have 3 things that are memorized that start me off, and then I can start to think of some other things that I'm actually grateful for. Because when you're in that negative spiral, that yucky stuff where you're fixated on whatever is awful, it's really hard to get your brain moved in a different direction. So memorize a couple of things and then, start those. And sometimes you say them through gritted teeth, I know, but then it starts this movement in a different direction. Another one that I use a lot is praying for others, because when I'm praying for somebody else's problems, I'm not thinking about my own as much. And that's good too. Anything that starts to move your brain from this place of fixation and obsession is really helpful. A couple others, sometimes community is really helpful. Sometimes it's not, unfortunately, but sometimes it can be, where you have somebody you can reach out to and say, hey, I'm a little obsessive right now. Can you just pray with me or talk to me or something? Sometimes that's helpful. And sometimes I will have a problem that I need to solve, something like, I don't know how to fix this thing on my website, which is not emergent. And I'll write it down in my phone, in my notes, so that I can come back to it in one of those moments when I need to move my brain to something else. Any of those things, it's that setting our mind on things above, right? And the setting is not an easy whoop. It is a very intense process. It's pouring down rain here. I don't know if you guys can hear thunder, but anyway, that's what's happening. Another thing is we're soaking in God's love for you, not when you achieve something or you win a trophy for person of the year, or you're a perfect person, or you finally don't, get mad at your husband or whatever. God's love is offered freely and without reserve all the time. And I think so often, instead of accepting and yielding, we try to do more because we think we can earn it or deserve it. And that's exhausting. And then we end up in this place where we're anxious again because we've missed the mark. So instead, we're soaking in just the amazingness that he says, I love you right where you are, not when you get to whatever, fill in the blank, or when you can, feel better, or when you can do more, or any of those things. There's no end to that. It starts now. Ephesians 3:17-19. Then by constantly using your faith, the life of Christ will be released deep inside you, and the resting place of his love will become the very source and root of your life. Then you will be empowered to discover what every Holy One experiences, the great magnitude of the astonishing love of Christ in all its dimensions. How deeply intimate and far-reaching is his love. How enduring and inclusive it is. Endless love beyond measurement that transcends our understanding. In other words, it don't make no sense. This extravagant love pours into you until you are filled to overflowing with the fullness of God. That's my favorite verses right now. And every time I read them, I just go, whoa, that is God's love for you. I could soak in that all day and still not understand it. And so instead, it's accepting it And that's where we're trying to understand it. We're trying to process with our mind and prove that we deserve it somehow. We can't. And so instead, it's just, okay, you want to give me that? Okay, I'll accept it. So we're operating from overflow, not overwhelm. You already have everything you need, no matter what you're facing. You get to ask for the revelation of that, though, in each moment of each day. And that's where it's difficult, I think, sometimes to look at what's ahead of us and go, well, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to deal with anxiety. And there's no formula. True. And so ask him for his presence in every moment of every day. And the moments get very small when you do that, don't they? It's just this one. We can't handle tomorrow or even like this afternoon. It's just right now. And that's okay. The life of Christ is your resting place, your source for each day, and the empowerment for the impossible, even the impossible of your own life. Let's pray. Father, I pray for each person hearing this, that they would accept and embrace the love that you have shed all over the place for them, that they wouldn't go into defeat or embarrassment or self-criticism over the anxiety that they face, but would instead bring it to you and allow you to heal it and to provide strength in whatever weakness they feel. Thank you that the Christian life doesn't make any sense and it's completely impossible without you. But with you, all things are possible. And so I pray for each one of them that they would embrace that and live it and see the difference that makes. Thanks in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I threw a lot at you, but I will send this recording out later this week when I send out my monthly email. And yeah, thanks so much for being with me. Take care.